Okay, within the reference guide to regulatory compliance, starting on page 486, within subsection 3, deposits, Electronic Funds Availability Act, Reg CC, discussing the non-payment of rules on collection of checks and the non-payment notice of non-payment, part 4 of that section. If the paying bank is not going to pay a check of $2,500 or more, it must notify the depository bank so that the depository bank receives a notice by 4 p.m. local time on the second business day after the banking day that the check was presented. Notice may be made by any reasonable means, including the return check. Notice must include name and routing number, paying bank, name payee, amount, date of endorsement of depository bank, account number of the customer, branch name or number of depository bank, trace number associated with the endorsement of the depository bank, and the reason for non-payment. Depository bank may accept notices during its banking day either at the telephone or telegraph number of its return check unit as indicated in its endorsement, or at the general purpose number of its head office or branch. Depository bank must send notice to its customer by midnight of banking day following the banking day receive the check or notice. The notice requirements do not apply to the depository bank that does not maintain accounts. Warranties given by paying and returning banks. Section E. Warranties given by the paying bank or returning bank involve a check being returned within UCC Reg J or Reg CC deadlines. A bank is authorized to return the check. C, the check has not been materially altered. D, if a notice in lieu of return is sent, the check has not and will not be returned. And E, these warranties are not made on U.S. Treasury checks or U.S. Postal Service money orders or checks drawn on a state or local government. If a notice of non-payment is sent, the paying bank warrants A, the check will be returned within the UCC Reg J or Regulation CC deadlines. B, the bank is authorized to send the notice. And C, the check has not been materially altered. 3, damages for breach of any warranties will not exceed the consideration received by the paying or returning bank plus finance charges and expenses. 4, if a returning bank is sued for breach of warranty, it may tender its defense to a prior returning bank or the paying bank. 5, remotely created checks. A, remotely created checks are checks that are not created by the paying bank and that do not bear a signature applied or purported to be applied by the person on whose account the check is drawn. B, a bank that transfers or presents a remotely created check and receives a settlement or other consideration for its warrants that the person on whose account the check is drawn authorize the issuance of the check in the amount stated on the check and to the payee stated on the check. And C, if a paying bank asserts a claim for breach of this warranty, the warranting bank may defend by proving that the transaction met UCC specified conditions that preclude the customers asserting that the remotely created check was unauthorized. Endorsements. Banks must follow the endorsement standards in Appendix D to Reg CC. Any bank may recover from any prior bank if it does not receive payment for the check from a subsequent bank in the collection chain. After the check has been endorsed by a bank, only a bank may acquire the rights of a holder until the check has been returned or until it has been specially endorsed by a bank to a person who is not a bank. And lastly, a depository bank may apply another bank's endorsement as a depository bank's endorsement under special arrangements. Presentment of checks. A check payable at or through a paying bank is considered to be drawn on that bank for expeditious return and notice purposes. A check is received by the paying bank when it is received at a location that the bank requested, an address of the bank associated with its routing number, any branch or head office if no address is on the check, or a branch or head office if that address is on the check. A bank may truncate checks and present them by transmission of information only by agreement with the paying bank. Section H. Banks may vary the requirements of the check collection portion of Regulation CC by agreement between them, except that the responsibility of a bank for good faith or failure to exercise ordinary care may not be disclaimed or limited. Liability. Banks must exercise ordinary care and act in good faith. Damages for failure to act in good faith are not limited. Damages for failure to exercise ordinary care are in the amount of loss incurred up to the amount of the check minus the amount of loss that would have been incurred if ordinary care had been exercised. Comparative negligence. If a person does not use ordinary care or act in good faith, then damages incurred will be diminished by the amount of negligence or bad faith attributable to that person. Responsibility for certain aspects of checks. A recovering bank is responsible for damages to the extent that the condition of the bank of the substitute check that it transfers, presents, or returns is found to adversely affect the ability of a subsequent bank to endorse the check legibly, or if it causes an endorsement that previously was applied in accordance with Reg CC to become illegible. Condition of check. A paying bank is responsible if the condition of the check when issued affects the ability of the bank to legibly endorse the check. A depository bank is responsible if after issuance the condition of the back of the check prevents its legible endorsement. Substitute checks. Definition of substitute check. A substitute check is legally equivalent to the original if it accurately represents all the information on the front and back of the original check at the time the check was truncated. It bears the legend, "This is a legal copy of your check. You can use it the same way you would the original check." Duties of reconverting banks. Reconverting banks must ensure that substitute checks bear all endorsements applied by parties that previously handled the check in any form. Another duty of reconverting checks, identify the reconverting bank in a manner that preserves any previous reconverting bank identification. And third, identify the bank that truncated the original check. Substitute check warranties, Section C. A bank that transfers, presents, or returns a substitute check or an electronic representation of it for which it received consideration makes the following warranties to the person to whom the bank transfers, presents, and returns a substitute check, and to any subsequent recipient of such check. 1. The substitute check meets the requirements for legal equivalence. 2. The bank, drawer, or endorser will receive presentment or return of the substitute check, the original check, or any paper or electronic representation such that the person will be asked to make payment based on a check that it has already paid. Substitute check indemnity scope. A bank that transfers, presents, or returns a substitute check or a paper or electronic presentation of a substitute check will indemnify the recipient and any subsequent recipient for any loss incurred by any recipient and if the loss occurred due to receipt of the substitute check instead of the original. The amount of the indemnity is A. If the loss resulted from a breach of a substitute check warranty provided in Reg CC, the amount of the indemnity will be the loss, including interest, costs, expenses, and reasonable attorney's fees, approximately caused by the breach of warranty. Or B. If the loss did not result from a breach of Reg CC warranty, the amount of the indemnity will be the amount of the loss up to the amount of the substitute check plus interest, expenses, and attorney's fees related to the substitute check. Comparative negligence being if a loss based on a substitute check results in whole or in part from the negligence of an indemnified person, the indemnity will be reduced in proportion to the amount of the negligence or bad faith of the indemnified person. Effect of producing the original checks. If an indemnifying bank produces the original check or a sufficient copy, the bank will be liable only for losses that are incurred up to the time that the bank provides the original check to the indemnified person, and the indemnifying bank will have a right to return any funds that it has paid in excess of those losses. Subrogation of rights. An indemnifying bank will be subrogated to the rights of the person that indemnifies to the extent of the indemnity it has provided and may attempt to recover from another person based on warranty or other claim. Indemnified persons have a duty to comply with all reasonable requests for assistance from an indemnifying bank in connection with any claim the bank brings against a warrantor or other person related to the check that is the subject of the indemnity. Expedited recredit for consumers. 1. Circumstance giving rise to a claim. A consumer may make a claim for a recredit for a substitute check if the consumer has received a substitute check or does not include images of checks that do not meet the requirement of a substitute check and asserts that the bank where the consumer has his or her account charged the account for a substitute check that was provided to the consumer. The substitute check was not properly charged to the consumer's account, or the customer has a warranty claim with respect to the check, the consumer suffered a loss, and production of the original check or a copy is necessary to determine whether or not the substitute check was properly charged. Procedures for making claims. A consumer must make his or her claim with a bank that holds the consumer's account. The claim must be made no later than the 40th calendar day after the date the customer statement or the substitute is mailed or is received. If the consumer cannot make a claim within the time deadlines due to extenuating circumstances, the bank will extend the time deadlines. If the consumer makes a claim orally and the bank requires the claim to be put in writing, the claim will be considered to be timely if the oral claim was made on time. Content of the claim. The consumer's claim must include a description of the consumer's claim, including the reason why the consumer believes his or her account was improperly charged with a substitute check. A statement that the consumer suffered a loss and an estimate of the amount of that loss and other content of the consumer's claim include the reason why production of the original check or a sufficient copy is necessary to determine whether or not the charge to the consumer's account was proper. And lastly, sufficient information to allow a bank to identify the substitute check and investigate the claim. Incomplete claims: if the consumer does not provide all the information required in the claim, the bank must inform the consumer that the claim is not complete and identify the information that is missing. Form and submission of the claim: if the bank holding the consumer's account requires a claim in writing, the bank may permit the consumer to submit the claim electronically. Must inform a consumer who submits a claim orally of any written claim requirement, and must compute the time periods for acting on the consumer's claim from the date the bank receives the consumer's written claim. Bank action on claim: a bank that receives a valid claim must recredit the consumer's account for the amount of the consumer's loss up to the amount of the substitute check plus interest if the account is interest-bearing. Complete the recredit no later than the end of the business day after the banking day on which the bank makes a determination, and send the customer the required notice. Recredit pending investigation is where I picked up in another reading. But I will mention that these claims are requiring a lot, but they're directly input into a Federal Reserve form, and that's why they are so specific. If one could get their hands on that form, it might make it a little less complicated, this section. That's my 2 cents on that. Generally, a substitute check claim will be because a account was debited twice. Other reasons for checks to be disputed in this way is improper endorsement. And beyond that, you don't see too many of these.